Yeah. Hi.
Hi.
So today, let's talk about mental models, and one in particular that's Elon Musk's favorite, first principles thinking.
Well, I kind of like his success, so let's go with that.
I think he's done well.
Yeah.
Especially with his SpaceX. So yes, let's start with mental models. Just a quick review.
Okay.
A mental model is basically something we all do all the time, and it's a simplified representation of how something works. So you've probably got mental models of I don't know how something works in the kitchen, or where, you know, like you've got maybe a very simplified model of where stuff is in your kitchen. Like you don't try to remember where every pot and pan and every knife. No. You've got a knife drawer, you've got a cabinet that's got, you know, your big pans and, you know, frying pans and whatever. Another mental model that I think a lot of us use is in terms of how we understand the workings of our body and in relation to medicine. So medicine. And this gets to where I want to go. So specialists, medicine has become a very, very specialized field. And so there's a doctor, basically, I'm going to oversimplify it right now. There's a doctor for like each organ or organ system in your body. So you've got a doctor that's for your lungs, and you've got a doctor for your heart, and you've got a doctor for your stomach. And so we get the idea that these are all separate things. And then even like taking the heart, for example, a simplified model of the heart is that it's like a pump, right? You know, that's just pumped like a pump that's pumping water or whatever. Right. Well, it's way more complicated than that, but it's really simple and easy.
We know that because we know some neuroscience.
But it's really easy to understand that it pumps our blood around our body, and for most of the time that's enough. Right.
It's very much a generalization.
That's mental models.
Right.
Now that's a generalization of a mental model. Okay. The mental models that we're talking about, which were made famous by a fellow named Charlie Munger. His name is not as well known as Warren Buffett, but he's Warren Buffett's partner. Right. And the two of them use mental models to make their amazing investments, and they've become rather successful at that.
Yeah, another one.
So Charlie, you know, he's written, you know, he wrote a book called Poor Charlie's Almanac. He's spoken about mental models. Yeah. First principles thinking is one of his favorites, and also Elon Musk has talked about it. Right. So
tell me about.
There are other billionaires that also mental models, like Bill Gates, and so you know,
So tell me about
a good way to go.
First principle.
Okay. First principles thinking. First principles thinking is the idea of getting down to the very basic fundamentals of something.
Granular.
Granular implies tiny things, and this is more big things. So I don't want to, but the base, like the really fundamental stuff that you can't.
Your foundation.
You basically can't break it down any simpler. Okay, that would be first principles thinking, and to get to that in any particular area, first of all, it requires us to slow down and think and not take shortcuts. Second of all, it requires us to go through some kind of a process of identifying what we think we know, and then starting to question that. And then, you know, how do I know that? What's my evidence? What if I'm wrong? Who disagrees with me? You know, who that knows what they're talking about. Another thing would be, what are my assumptions? Big one about assumptions. Yes. So recently, one example of assumptions not being questioned and kind of being dogmatized was, again, in the medical field. For many years, they were not able to successfully treat people with ulcers. Yeah. And they believed, there was an assumption that our stomach was a sterile environment because of the stomach acid, that bacteria couldn't live in our stomachs. So they didn't even consider that a bacteria could be causing ulcers.
But they didn't think that the flu and things like that, which is bacteria.
Not in our stomach. They thought it was elsewhere. I don't know a lot of detail there. It was just that was the assumption that was unquestioned because it was accepted as truth, and that's a real key to getting to first principles thinking is, what are our assumptions? What have we accepted as truth that really are just assumptions? Because that distinction is huge. So to finish that story, there was a pathologist that figured out that, oh my gosh, there really are bacteria living in this person's stomach and other people's, and oh my goodness, what if that's the case, then if we take away that assumption, then what can we learn? He ended up getting a Nobel Prize. They discovered that H. pylori bacteria was the primary cause of ulcers, and now people are able to easily treat, doctors are able to easily treat ulcers with a combination of antibiotics and other stuff, so like Pepto-Bismol. Anyway,
who knew?
So that's an example of questioning assumptions. But first principles thinking is, there's two levels. First of all, it's in any one field, getting down to the basics, questioning the assumptions, and in that thought process. And more detail, the Socratic questioning method, or the Socratic method, is a process of going through some of those questions that I listed. Another thing in the corporate world is called the 5 whys method, and that's called getting down to root cause. Again, first principles, root cause, very similar.
Right.
So that's, we would modify that with our language to avoid the question why, but what caused that, but still, taking it down to where there's nothing below that. So first principles thinking in one area. Now, the next thing is, we talked about specialists. So in any field, we all tend to be specialists, right? Some people specialize in project management. Other people specialize in customer service or marketing or whatever. And so when we specialize in a field, we tend to have a kind of a narrow set of tools, especially our thinking tools that we use and our models that we use. So if we, and so that limits us. That limits what we can do in terms of finding novel solutions. It limits our creativity, basically.
Well, that's true. That's true, because we already make decisions based on that.
Yeah, we stick to what we know.
Right.
If we can expand that and learn some of the first principles from other fields, then we can, we can come at a problem from many different angles and look at it basically through another's eyes. And by combining maybe 2 or 3 of these, we come up with much more creative and innovative solutions than we would by sticking in one field. So that's both a benefit of having multiple mental models, because Charlie Munger talked about having a lattice work of mental models that encompass all these different areas, but then also in the first principles thinking, using that same concept and learning first principles from, for example, physics. Okay, some of the very basic physics laws of physics are the mechanical laws of Newton, like the laws of momentum and things like that. How many times have you heard the idea of momentum applied to your activity, like getting momentum in your business or getting momentum in building up momentum in sales?
Yeah.
Momentum in physics is strictly limited to physical objects with mass. So we are all applying, when we use that concept, we are applying a mental model, a simplified representation to something outside where it was created. So that's an example of how we might be doing this already. Now, if we do it more consciously and we expand our library.
Vocabulary.
Thank you. That's the word I was searching for. You read my mind.
Yeah,
She's very psychic.
I'm very good at that.
And so, yes, if we expand our vocabulary to include a larger set, then we can speak and think much more innovatively.
Right,
So,
because that's the whole point, right? Is to think outside that box.
Yes.
To come to a solution or a
finding resources. Let's use
right.
because
Okay,
that's what
let's do
yeah.
that.
Because a solution again is a trap.
Oh, that's
one
true.
solution, because we're locked. Now, if
Yeah,
that doesn't work, we're
true.
stuck.
Oh, true.
So yeah, getting resourceful.
Resourceful.
That's what we are in a world that is changing so rapidly, and we can't even imagine what's coming in a couple of years.
Right.
So we need, rather than trying to find something that's going to work today and forever, we need to develop processes that allow us to adapt to whatever happens. And that's where mental models and first principles thinking.
How quickly?
Oh, well, by the time this is a year old, it'll sound silly if I even go to examples. Right. So I won't.
Okay.
So thank you so much for spending some few minutes with us, and we will put a link. We did a previous video to about the mental models and billionaires, so I'll put a link in the comments in case you'd like to check that out. And we'll see you in another video. Bye.